Hey mamas, and welcome to the Entering Motherhood Podcast. If you're here for this, if you're as pumped up as I am and searching for that fire that you know is deep inside of you, then let's go. Let's uncover what it truly means to enter motherhood. You are a rock star. I believe in you. Let's doula this, let's crank it up a notch, and let's kick it into high gear together. Hello, mamas, and happy Women's History Month. This has been one of my favorite topics to dive in so far, and also has been the most overwhelming topic to process and really wrap my head around and give you information that hopefully will be enlightening and empowering and useful for you and honoring women in history and just women's history in general. We live in a time right now that is just at such a rapid point of progression, and it's hard to slow down and look back on history and see how much has changed and how far we have come. But, I think it's really necessary to do that. And it's hard to imagine a world without all of our modern technology and really just step into the role of what it was like to be a mother in previous generations, let alone 500 years ago. And I think sometimes we forget that America has only existed as we know it today for really just like a blip of time compared to the world as a whole. It's really just fascinating to read and learn how history has been documented. And it's amazing to think, what will we say about this time in our lives years from now? 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, another 500 years. Like, what will it look like? What will we be saying about the time that we are in right now? What history are we currently making? And what is that going to look like? How will things be documented and captured when there is really just so much out there and there's just so much to consume? And I honestly feel like it's just so hard to generalize right now. And I think, diving into all of this stuff, I've realized it really is hard to generalize any part of history and really just try to capture what it was like when there is just so much life and history and avenues and perspectives. And there really is just a massive amount of news outlets and journal articles and TV shows, movies. So much content is being created. Books are being written. Events are happening. We have documents and websites and so many more things to come that, we can't even begin to imagine what it will be like, and to have to think of how history is going to be portrayed and how we can use history to play into, what we can expect to see and how that affects our day-to-day lives right now. And I truly feel like every culture that exists in our lives right now has a different tradition and a different way of looking at things and different perspectives. And I really feel like that's all rooted in us as individuals and our family dynamics. And it really dictates how we see history in our own individual generational timelines. So, if you think about it, like every household in the world has a different story to tell. And, most of the time, a lot of us can't even trace back a few generations before or know, what that was like for them, because we haven't had those conversations. And if we had, maybe we only have like 1 or 2 generations that are alive at the same time that we can truly get an idea of what that time period could be like. Other than that, it's just a lot of hearsay, or, oh yeah, like your grandmother did this or your great grandfather did that, and this is how this was like. And we have to understand too that that story that's being told, that, interpretation of what that time period was like, is an individual viewpoint. And it's very hard to see where we stand now, like in this exact spot, at this exact time, experiencing this moment in this time in every different aspect, and try to understand what is going on and be able to cultivate all of that to be documented into what we want future generations to see, interpret, take away. And that's really, like where history comes into play. And we can thank history so much for giving us all of this information and being able to look at where we have come from. And there's so many different avenues and aspects of how you can track down history now with, a massive amount of internet knowledge and resources and stuff. So, I have never been more fascinated and interested in learning about history than I am now in my own life, and really just uncovering where we have come from and taking the time to learn about people who have paved the way is really empowering, and something that I think all of us should really consider when we're trying to pave a new path or just, live our life. We can look to history and see how things were done and see how much has changed. And I think it helps give us an idea of what's possible. And specifically in this episode, we're going to be touching on the history of working mothers in American culture, and really just starting from when we originally colonized into, what we know it to be today. And again, like even this history tends to be biased and skewed because it's based on what we're able to find through our history books and the news outlets and different documents that are presented to us. What you're taught is really how you understand what this history is to be known as. And there's just so many untold stories, and it's really hard to generalize the past and bulk it into, a timeline of events and really capture all of that. And I think that's what's so unique about our time right now, like having all of these different content platforms and different avenues of how we can share each other's stories, and having all these individual stories, it's going to be able to get a lot of information of what different people in different areas of the world are experiencing, and hopefully be helpful in looking back at how things were and being able to utilize that information and encouraging people to share their stories. I have come to realize is what many of us are taught, or, were taught in public school systems in America, and the structure basically of the American culture ultimately is a truth that's told by those people that created the textbooks that we consume. And, what is written in there is what we have to go off of if we're not really, taking the time to dig further or documenting our own generational information, those events, like, who even discovered America or what it was like are still being rewritten, and it's still shifting, and we're learning more. So basically what I'm trying to say is, even though these events took place, and we can speculate large times in history, it's important to point out that everything is able to be questioned. And it's interesting when we can look at it from more of a curious mindset and use the information that we find that is relevant to our lives and be able to build a future that we wish to see and take what we know and use it to do that. Our minds really like to see patterns and see different possible outcomes. And it uses that to rationalize and trust that we can achieve certain goals. So for some of us, it takes seeing someone else do a task or set a goal that we thought was otherwise impossible to do before we attempt to do it ourselves. And history has an amazing way of making that possible. And in the world of working mothers, we still have a lot to overcome, but we have truly come a long way in, I think, a short amount of time. And I think that's another thing, like we are led to believe that these times of women unable to vote and a lot of women suffraging was many, many years ago. And it wasn't. It was, a couple generations ago. And I think that's something to really point out and understand. Time seems like it was so long ago, but in many circumstances, it's sometimes just perceived to be that way. So going back now, it is understood that America began colonizing here in the 1600s. And at this time, because of the structure that existed, a woman's job typically resided in domestic responsibilities that, were in the home, which was caring for the children, cooking meals, cleaning the house, all that like inside the home responsibilities. And it was very uncommon for women to be working outside the home at all. And if they were, it still was typically related to household tasks like sewing and baking, educating children, making home goods, such like soaps or candles. And it wasn't until the 1700s that women were even allowed to own or manage property. And even still, this was only if their husbands were physically or mentally unable to do so. Overall, women's rights were just ridiculously minimized, and they were limited to do what they could, actually do, and then top all that with societal expectations. And we have mothers rarely pushing for anything aside from raising their children, because this was the story that we were told to believe was what needed to be done. You stay in your home and you learn how to take care of a home, and then you get married, you have children, and you take care of that home. And so this was literally what was kind of being presented to us. And if a woman was to do anything outside of that as a society in America, that was really just unheard of. It was something that not a lot of women were doing. And then at the end of the 1700s, we had the Revolutionary War, and America gained its independence from Britain. And when this was going on, we were also having the Industrial Revolution. And that started in 1760 and pretty much, they say, like kind of went until 1840. And America, as well as Europe, started to have manufacturing processes which created more jobs and more distribution of goods and other products and such that were going on because of this manufacturing process. And it was here that a growing number of women started to actually enter the paid workforce, and there was a need for increased childcare because those mothers were going out and working. So many mothers were, as they say, forced into the workforce because they needed to go and help provide for their families financially. And when they did go out to help financially provide for their families, there was huge pay gaps. And children were actually working as well. So a lot of the times girls would start working at a young age, and then if they were able to marry into a family that was financially able to have her stay home, then that's what she would do, or she would also continue to just stay in the workforce. But in the early 1800s, a woman was typically only making a third to a half of what a man would make for the same exact job. It was kind of like, oh, like let's hire the women and the children because we can pay them less. Hey mamas, I just wanted to take a second and stop real quick and talk about Postpartum University. If you are a mama or if you are a professional serving moms, it is an amazing resource to have. And there is also now monthly memberships that you can be a part of to get a bunch of training resources and materials to help moms heal in the postpartum period. And like I said, if you're a mom, there are amazing resources for you there as well to help along the way. I'm going to leave a link in the show notes for you to check that out. And with that, let's just get back to the episode. And then, there were various wars and such that were going on in the 1800s. And then in the early 1900s, we had World War I and World War II, which was 1917 and 1941. And we had men going off and fighting in the war. And there were also other women who were traveling overseas as nurses or other roles for the military. But mothers who needed to stay with their young children ended up filling in the gaps of the workforce in the US, which at that time was mainly manufacturing and agricultural roles. So they were going in and they were working and still caring for their children. Again, the childcare services were needed, and they were filling these gaps that were occurring with men going off and fighting in the war. And a few key points to mention that really covers all working women from the 1900s, not just mothers, are the Fair Labor Standards Act that was passed in 1938. And, we still seem to be working out the flaws, and we still see those gender wage discrepancies almost 100 years ago. And even though these factors are coming into play and the system is really trying to make it be so that this is not occurring because of the way that things were, I believe that there was just discrepancies between the gender wage and, still is occurring in some circumstances today. And that was passed in 1938. And then not until 1960 are women even allowed to own their own personal bank account. So, it's like They're starting to work for pay and they're bringing money financially to their family, but then it's going into a bank account with their husband, or they don't really have ownership of where that money is going, or where they can keep it, or where they can safely secure that money that they are earning. So you can see like how, okay, sure, like we're given access to work for pay and we're getting these opportunities, but we're still very limited in our rights and our abilities of what we can do with that money. And then the Civil Rights Act was in 1964 and was passed and stated that employers were not able to discriminate based on gender. And honestly, like the fact that we needed to create a law in order to stop this type of discrimination is hard to believe now. But what's more shocking is that this was less than 60 years ago. And, most individuals who were working during this time are most likely retired, but the ramifications and the workplace culture still lingers in many professions because of this and because this was going on. And again, that generational effect is seen in the workplace. You have individual family generational biases. You have workplace generational, culture effects happening. You are seeing a work culture acting in a specific way, and then the new people that come in experience that culture. They get a feel for, oh, okay, this is the way things function. This is the way things work. Let's keep this up to fit in at this workplace, to fit in this work culture environment. We have to act like this. This is the type of conversations we have. This is the type of activities we have. This is the kind of interactions that we have with, different employees and our coworkers. And this is what a boss looks like. This is what, a new hire has to go through. And to say that like that hasn't gone away and that we are able to just kind of flip a switch and those cultural, workplace environments are able to change, it's just crazy to think. Like we can't just, drop a law and all of a sudden those workplace environments are going to change and shift. And I think, in order to continue to make this be more acceptable and make it be more inclusive, we have to really reshape what it's like to work in these different types of careers, what it's like to have a good, inclusive workplace, and what the culture of work can look like. And even, in our government and the history of our presidency, we have yet to see a woman sit in that position, let alone have mothers play an integral role in these places. So it really makes us question if we can care for our children while simultaneously contributing to society outside of the house, because we have not seen a lot of examples of that. And again, like going back to how our mind works and how we like to see patterns and how we like to see, somebody else do it and make sure that it's possible. And then that encourages us to pursue that and go in that direction. We are still seeing very few women in specific roles, let alone mothers. So should we be pursuing both? What does this look like? How can we make it more of a balance and have it be something that's obtainable? Why have we created such a stigma around a mother who works for pay? And, why is it that if you have young children, it's more of something that's an issue compared to when your children are older and then maybe you return to the workforce or, things like that. I think, we have a lot to think about, and we have to be willing to alter that work-life balance structure to benefit more than just working mothers. I really feel like that can benefit society and really just help us thrive in a new system that's able to emerge. And yes, like parents want to spend more time with their children. They want to work flexible hours. They want to be able to go on field trips or after school activities or be able to see their children more than just a short amount of time at night. And I think that applies to anybody that's working. The daily grind of wake up, go to work, come home, eat dinner, go to sleep, do it again. That Groundhog Day occurrence really doesn't serve anybody. And I feel, back when we had our huge industrial revolution and all these manufacturing facilities and, long days out at the farm, and we really needed to be working in order to keep up with these demands of fueling the economy and the system and getting things to work. Sure, that was needed, but we can reevaluate what's going on and, not only make it more fluid and enjoyable for working mothers, but we can have it be something that more people desire. And I think it starts with us asking those questions, and it starts with us looking at history and saying, why did we need to work the 9 to 5? Why did we need to have things structured the way that they were? And what does it look like if we do things differently? And, these are just sort of questions that we need to focus on. And if anything, history can show us that it's possible to change and still succeed. We need change to progress, and we can learn from our past to improve our future. You might be the first mother in a long line of generations who is starting something new. I'd be surprised if you weren't. There are new paths, new careers, new ways of life that are continuously being discovered every single day. I mean, internet, social media, podcasts, what you're listening to right now never existed in history. And so we are rapidly adjusting and cultivating new experiences like never before. And we all have the potential to make massive waves in history. So, in honor of Women's History Month, I hope you found this episode enjoyable. There are some books that I have been reading and, tapping into and uncovering that I will list in the show notes. If you want to continue on this conversation, if you want to find out more information, if you want to dig a little bit deeper about what it means to be a working mother, or just, find out more information about our history and what that means moving forward, then check that out. Feel free to message me, get in contact with me. I would love to hear your thoughts about this, and also just what else you're finding out this month for women's history and what other fun history facts you have, because like I said earlier, this has been one of my favorite things to dive into, and I never knew that I was such a fan of history and what it really has to uncover. And there is just so much there to dig into and so much there to be a wealth of knowledge for us to utilize. So see you later, mamas. Thank you, mamas, so much for listening. Remember, you are a rock star. I believe in you. Let's doula this. Let's crank it up a notch and let's kick it into high gear together. Hit that subscribe button, share this episode with a friend, message me, email me, call me, beat me. You know how to reach me. We're doing this, mamas. I am so excited to catch you here next week. This is your one-stop go-to place for helping you find the resources you need to make the best choices for you and your family during pregnancy, birth, and most importantly, postpartum. See you later, mamas.